Hello and welcome to Australia in Space TV. My name's Chris Cubbage. I'm the editor with Australia in Space magazine and My Security Media. Today we're joined by a very special guest, Lieutenant General Larry James, United States Air Force retired, who's just taken on a professor role of space innovation with Monash University and also as a strategic advisor with SmartSat. Larry, thanks very much for joining us.
Well, Chris, thanks for having me. It's great to be here on your show.
Welcome, and welcome to Sydney as well. You've just landed not too long ago, and this follows straight from your role with NASA's JPL or Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California. Uh, and again, I was just looking at the budget. You had a $2.6 billion budget, so I'm not too sure how Monash and SmartSat are going to be able to satisfy your budgetary requirements or normal oversight. But yeah, maybe introduce us to what brings you to Sydney with space innovation, and maybe also what your priorities will be. What you might have in mind with this type of role. You're a former COO, so you're very mission driven, I imagine.
Yes, I mean, what brings me here is I had spent 35 years in the Air Force, 11 years with NASA JPL, and I was ready to look at other opportunities after spending that much time there. So I've always worked internationally across my career, so great partnerships with Europe, with India, with Australia, and really was motivated by international work. So I looked around and uh, really had a lot of great friends with in Australia, had worked with the Australians for decades, and so just felt like they're really a rising space nation, and this is a great opportunity to just be a part of that and bring whatever expertise or skills I can to help Australia continue to grow and develop capabilities.
What do you think stands out to you at the moment when you have a look at the Australian space sector? Anything that kind of sort of stands out to you that you think, okay, this is a great opportunity that you want to drive forward?
I think several things. First is obviously, the space agency standing up, a few years ago. The Defense Space Command now stood up, a few years ago. The fact that we have the SmartSat CRC up and operating and really driving innovation across both the university research areas as well as the commercial partnerships. You have, organizations, universities like Monash, which have a good space program and curriculum, helping to develop that. So, and then you've got really, I think, the small businesses that are starting up. We were just at the gala event and here in Sydney this week, and you see all these small businesses that are starting that have capital that are driving innovation across Australia. So I think it's really a very focused time to be here.
The other one is there's quite sort of growing, it seems, a NASA alumni in Australia as well. We had Jim Free host a gym in Perth last November. Uh, are you sort of able to reach out to those? Are you aware of sort of former NASA colleagues, particularly
Oh,
JPL as
absolutely.
well here in Australia?
Oh, yes. I mean, I know Jim well. Pam Milroy's a good friend. All the folks, of course, back at JPL. In fact, Andy's the CEO of SmartSat. He and I are going back to visit JPL next week just to continue dialogue and opportunities and innovation and partnerships. So, all those things in terms of continuing to strengthen the partnerships for Australia, not only across the US, but across other nations as well, is certainly something I'm interested in and hopefully will help in that arena.
Well, you mentioned Andy, Professor Andy Coronius with SmartSat CRC. Sounds like he's been a bit of a driver there to bring you over to Australia if you're on first name basis. Maybe describe your role with Monash and SmartSat CRC, how you plan to sort of divide the time between the two.
I think for SmartSat, it's really about continuing to think strategically about where does SmartSat go in the next couple of years. They have a 7-year life, if you will, with the current funding from the government. So, what does the next generation of SmartSat look like? What are the partnerships? What are the technologies? What are the needs of Australia that SmartSat can meet? And then for Monash, it's about, again, continuing to develop research curriculum, continuing to develop partnerships. You've got AUKUS out there and opportunities with AUKUS. How does that play in terms of strengthening the space research arena in Monash? So those are big picture things that we're certainly interested in.
I think another one is the links back to JPL and NASA, the both opportunities for Australian either researchers and companies. Sort of, how the inner workings of JPL and NASA operates, and therefore can give them that advice. Is that one of sort of the core aspects and strengths that you bring? Do you think the opportunities, say in the Artemis mission and the like?
Sure. I think broadly speaking, that is absolutely correct. And for example, SmartSat has already has partnership with JPL in certain areas with Aquasat and sensors and those sorts of things. So it's continuing to build on that. It's continuing to look at the opportunities and build those relationships and really continue to strengthen the ties between the U.S. and Australia in this arena, as well as other nations. Again, I've worked closely with the Indians and DLR in Germany and CNES in France, and just how do we continue to build those international partnerships which are benefiting all?
One last one is, given the size and given you are the chief operating officer and deputy director with JPL, and I mentioned I mentioned your budget earlier, and you were there for some time. A sort of a 13-year tenure as well. There's two questions I have in my mind. Is one is, was there much change in the way that you managed that program, because it's so broad? You start to have a look at what JPL is involved with and how many missions NASA has. It's not just inspiring, but it's potentially overwhelming. How you manage that program? What one question I had in my mind was, what do you do day to day as a COO for NASA's JPL? What did it look like?
Well, it's a host of things, right? I mean, there's always things coming at you. I would say, broadly speaking, first of all, it's about really looking ahead. Where do we want to be in terms of 5 or 10 years? What is that strategic vision that we want to have? How do we continue to really lead the nation, in many ways, the world, in terms of technology? How do we invest in the right technology so that 5 years down the road, you have the capability you need to actually execute a mission? So that's a big part of it, I think. It was things like, how do we invest in machine learning? How do we invest in big data? How do we invest in AI? How do we invest in sensor technology? And then it's the day to day. It's like, okay, this project is running into problems here. How do we address that as an organization? Where do we bring the talent in to deal with that and those sorts of things? So it's the strategic picture, but it's also, you still have to deal with the day to day and the headquarters relationships and all those sorts of things.
I think one thing, what would be your advice to Australia or coming in? I don't know how much sort of pre pre observation you've had, but the initial advice that you would have for the Australian sector: one, to be positive, and two is that sort of lookout between that 5 and 10 year period. Any advice there or observations that you would have? Because again, maybe somewhat challenging that 5 to 10 year period, but it's essential to have that outlook.
Absolutely. I think, Australia brings tremendous capability in terms of the technical background, the university, capability here. There were many Australians that worked at JPL who came out of the university system here. So you look at Monash and all they're trying to do. So first, I would say, we just need to continue to build that technical infrastructure, the university infrastructure, continue to grow incredible talent and people. And then it's about, I think, harvesting that talent here locally. What are those key areas that Australia is very good in, where they can contribute to the broader global space community, but also focus on what is needed here in Australia. I mentioned Aqua Watch in terms of, that's important to Australia in terms of understanding the water quality and those sorts of things around this country. So focusing on those areas that can be global, but also just as importantly, help Australia in terms of managing infrastructure, understanding the Earth climate, all those sorts of things that are important.
Last one is, I suppose, a call to action, either something that might be coming up or that you'd like the audience to be alive to, particularly now that you're here in Australia. What's your sort of plans here for the remainder of 2024?
I think it's continuing to ensure that there is support across the continuum of research, development, integration, and operations. and integrating all of these things, whether it's the defense side of things, the civil side of things, the commercial side of things, and then ultimately the government, right? They ultimately have to come alongside and fund, and frankly, making this environment easy for investors to come in and bring up these small companies that are really doing incredible work and have innovative ideas.
Wonderful. Look, it's a pleasure to meet you, Larry. Lieutenant General Larry D. James, United States Air Force, retired, and a professor now of space innovation, Monash University, and strategic advisor with the SmartSat CRC. Real pleasure to have you on Australian Space TV. Even more so to see you now here in Sydney and having an impact on the Australian space sector. So, best of success for your role, given your antecedents. You've set yourself a high bar, I must say, in terms of the two former careers. So it's great to have you here now in our research capacity here in Australia. So thank you very much for joining us on Australian Space TV.
Well, Chris, thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to doing this again and getting more in depth with all that's going on.